right, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like another creator is back at it again with some critiques about popular gacha games. And I wanted to preface this bit of content by talking a little bit about one of my prior reacts to Sorousness. And I think it's safe to say, right, with this react over here, Hoyo CC's ruined Wuwa reviews, why Wuwa 2.0 was mid, I was going into Sorousness's critiques about Renacita, about Wuthering Waves 1.0 and 2.0 as a whole. And I thought that this video, right, was a little bit undercooked. I thought that some of the complaints being made weren't really as valid as I thought that they could be. And I thought they were just, being a Hoyo shill, right? I thought they were just being, like, oh, I just want to critique Wuthering Waves because I love Genshin so much. But in reality, it turns out they just might hate every gacha game as a whole. And it might turn out that every video they make is just a critique. And when I look at their channel, right, I realized, oh my gosh, maybe they just make videos about things they don't like, and they have so many videos about Genshin because they just don't like the game. And so with that in mind, right, I think it's safe to say that we need to give this type of content another opportunity, right? I think we need to give this type of content a bit of a second shake, because Sorousness is back at it with a video called, "Is Genshin's critique unfair? Or should we have higher expectations?" And I can 1000% wholeheartedly, 1,000,000 times out of 10, agree that higher expectations should be had for Genshin Impact, and that the player base as a whole should not be accepting of all the bullshit predatory things, terrible world, quest, map design, all of that stuff that they're bundling into Natlan, huge drop after Fontaine, all that stuff they've been incorporating into the game across, honestly, the second Wuwa released. A lot of disappointing things, and I'm excited to hear about why they're really not that good.
Every time I critique Genshin's storytelling or gameplay, there will be people in the comments saying the same thing. It's just a gacha game, what do you expect? While so many say it's best to ignore the comments, in my experience, people often make good points. Even when I disagree with their premise, the discussions they spark can be fascinating, and it's always important to be open to having your mind changed. But while I am, of course, open to being persuaded on this, I absolutely think that this perspective is objectively a bad thing. So, why do some people engage in critique while others try to make a stand against it? Does one side have unrealistically high expectations? Are the other side giving huge corporations a pass even at their own expense? Is there even a point in having these discussions in the first place?
I think that she's bringing up a really fair point at the start, right? You're always going to run into people, especially in the gacha space, especially in a situation where they've been spending hundreds. Nobody spends just $10 on Genshin, let's be honest here, right? And they're spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on the character, on the game, on all the mechanics, on their investments across, either their refreshes, weapons, stuff like that. They're going to be a little bit more critical about any sort of critique that comes the game's way, because you telling them that their product isn't good, or you telling them that their product is lacking, that's basically calling into question all of their expenditures that they've made. Would you love to hear that what you've been spending money on, what you've been spending your time on, what you've been investing into is actually bad, is actually trash, is actually garbage? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is always no. You hate to hear that. You hate to hear that you've been wasting your time. And it's safe to say that Genshin, when it launched, was an incredible investment, was a great way to spend your time, and in some cases money, right? You felt like you were getting a lot for what you were putting in because it was a pioneer in the space. But unfortunately, time's gone by, but a lot of the same old archaic, nasty, disgusting mechanics are still there, and they haven't fixed them yet. And that's where all the problems really are, to be honest. It's outdated, and the devs are making no attempt to fix it.
One thing I'd like to get out of the way before we really get into it is the assumption some people seem to make that anyone who uploads their thoughts to YouTube must think their perspective is somehow more important than anyone else's. Maybe some people are like that, but for me, that is absolutely not the case. Every single person watching or commenting on these videos has a perspective on it just as worth hearing as my own.
This is a disclaimer. This is 1000% like a disclaimer to avoid like unnecessary flame or flack. Let's be honest here, guys. Let's be honest here. Not every opinion or perspective warrants the same level of attention as other ones, okay? I am not going to take the opinion of somebody who has 5 minutes of playtime and value that as much as somebody who's been playing the game, right? As a day one player for like over a year. And they're trying to tell me about the mechanics of the game and like how they work. You have to recognize that there are just like some things when said by certain people based off of certain, qualifications, just don't make sense or shouldn't be listened to. And until like certain criteria is met, you just can't really take what those people are saying seriously. And the big problem with the internet, the big problem with things like comment sections, especially anonymous ones, is that people can just lie. People can just lie. And lying on the internet has to be the most common activity, that people on the internet partake in. Because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you overstate your expertise or overstate your knowledge about something? People will be confidently incorrect about numbers that you can just read in the game. You could just go into the game, open up a skill, read what it does and understand it, and people will just lie about that as well. It happens everywhere. And that's the thing. Wading through all the bullshit, finding out where the actual valuable either critique, commentary, or takes are coming from is one of the hardest parts in the space. With all the bullshit that's out there, sometimes it can be difficult to see what's actually worth hearing, or what's actually worth listening to in the first place. So I kind of heavily disagree here. But I mean, it's just a disclaimer at the start, right? We also have to factor that in.
The only difference is that I've taken the time to write mine out with a bit of structure, revisited and refined it a few times throughout the process, and put it out there in the hopes that it'll spark some interest. There's nothing stopping you from doing exactly the same. One of my favorite things is when someone comments saying they enjoyed the video and appreciated hearing my thoughts, but that their perspective on it is entirely the opposite of mine. Respectful dissenting opinions will always be valued in my corners of the internet. Over the course of multiple videos and several thousand comments, there were many different points of contention. Some people feel there are specific reasons we cannot hold Hoyo to higher standards.
Excited to hear those. Excited to hear what those reasons are for Hoyo not being held to higher standards.
Some agreed with parts of my perspective, but disagreed with the way I was presenting it. Some even fundamentally disagreed with the idea of people posting critique whatsoever. Each of these deserves consideration. Let's start with the more overarching ones first, and make our way towards the more specific ones. The most high level of all is the idea that we should not post critique at all. This one is almost incomprehensible to me, so if this was you and my interpretation of what you're saying is inaccurate, please explain. I think this is coming from a perspective where critique is seen as an attack, as if the critic is trying to tear things down, ruin everyone's enjoyment, denounce the creators, and maybe even paint anyone who does like it as someone who has poor taste. Viewed through this lens, critique is almost an attempt to say, this thing should not exist, or to discourage the creator from continuing to create. As someone who made a living in the world of art and design, I can't emphasize enough that this could not be further from the truth.
There's a big difference, right, between actual actionable, solid critique and simply hating on something for it existing. I do believe it is not genuinely impossible, but actually pretty difficult to find any popular critique, you know, that has like a decent number of views. Any popular critique about a video game that doesn't have like something that's actually slightly rooted in reality. You can say that a critique is bad. You could say that a critique is incomplete. You could say that a critique is misinformed. But the thing is that a majority of the time it is based off of something actually real, actually like decent for people, or something that people have actually experienced in the first place. And with that in mind, right, Genshin has so many of those like just fuck moments across the story, across the storytelling, across the leveling, across the gacha itself, that you would be, I'm trying to think of the right word, not on crack, but you would have to be delusional to pretend that the issues are not there. And by going ahead and saying that this critique shouldn't happen in the first place is straight, it's just it's a bit of a schizo moment. To say that the weapon banner isn't a problem. To say that a 75-25 is good in a game with the most tailored light cones or the most tailored weapons or equipment ever. And saying that that sort of stuff is like not a problem or completely fine when it diminishes the player experience ridiculously, right? And it has clear downsides even for the developer. It's a little bit rough.
All art is subjective, and a major reason it's so fascinating is that it can elicit such different responses in different people. Talking about it is a good thing, both for the people who are creating it and the people who are discussing it. As a creator, it's paramount that you get feedback about how your audience are reacting to your work. While some art is for the creator alone, most is intended to be experienced by others, games perhaps more so than other mediums. Critique is a key avenue for the audience to provide feedback to creators who can then gauge whether they successfully achieved their intent.
You want to know when heavy critique, heavy feedback and good alternatives made some action in the Hoyoverse space. You just have to look at games like Zenless Zone Zero and how they removed TVs from a huge portion of the game in version 1.4 and made it a lot better. You only have to look at Honkai Star Rail, where people were talking insane amounts of shit, warranted shit, by the way, about HSR 3.0 and its absurdly awful storytelling and one of the worst story experiences in gacha gaming. And also the fucking power creep too. Those are situations, right, where the devs have either already done or have committed to making big changes to their games because the customers and the people, the content creators, everybody in the community voiced their concerns loud enough and clearly enough so that the devs actually knew what they had to do. And guess what, guys? These devs at Hoyoverse, or whoever's in charge of the dev teams, they don't listen unless the game starts losing money. And I can guarantee you, ZZZ lost some money or wasn't doing as good revenue-wise as they wanted it to, and that's why they made the changes in 1.4. And I guarantee that Honkai Star Rail 3.0, they were expecting it to do way better than it did. And the fact that it didn't, it means that they're going to be changing a lot of shit with the game. But that criteria has to be met first. The game has to get fucked over in some way before the devs actually start fixing it. And if you want Genshin to get better, guys, you know what you have to do? Stop spending that goddamn money, and the game will get better. It will do a ZZZ 1.4 or a Honkai Star Rail 3.2, but the customers have to do something first.
Things they could do to improve, or maybe even spark some new ideas for the future. And as an audience, engaging in critique can open up whole new perspectives and let you see things in ways which you never would have done before. Some people do prefer to avoid it for that reason. Once you start looking deeper, it can change how you experience a story, and for some people that's not what they want at all, which is perfectly fine too. For me, and for many others who engage in these kinds of conversations, you get to enjoy the story once when you first experience it, and then enjoy it multiple other times as you get to see it in different lights from different angles, often greatly enriching your experience of it. Even when a critique is pointing to a flaw I didn't notice in something I enjoyed immensely, for me, it doesn't detract from the original experience. Nothing in this world is flawless. The Japanese art of kintsugi is a great visual metaphor for how this works for many of us. Imperfection gives things soul, and flaws do not diminish value. And even if the critique is painting things as fundamentally broken, that doesn't invalidate any enjoyment anyone gained from it.
I still feel like this is a disclaimer. I honestly still feel like we haven't started the actual video yet. But I'm going to be honest, understanding her audience, understanding that she is, with this video, right, kind of taking a shit on Genshin Impact. I guess a disclaimer that's about, you know, more than 1/7 of the whole video, I assume that is a bit warranted. We know who we're dealing with over here. The people that saw a thumbnail by Marco de Meatball and then started sending him death threats because a thumbnail had Hu Tao and Kafka in a wave with Carlotta on top. You guys remember that one? Yeah, bro had to shut down Twitter and avoid death threats for that one. So, hey, I get the disclaimer here. You do what you have to do when you're dealing with rabid animals. Fair enough.
A more common point was that it's unfair to have high expectations of gacha games specifically. Some of these were due to how I personally frame my critiques, and others were a more broad perspective on expectations. In my videos, I'll often reference something from a completely different context to illustrate and clarify the point I'm trying to make. For example, when talking about Genshin's poor use of subtext, I brought up how it's handled in The Lord of the Rings. Or when talking about the integration of lore in narrative, I referenced Dune. For many people, this diluted the point I was trying to make because they feel it's unfair. In some cases, due to the fundamental differences between games and film or TV. In others, because of the difference in approach between live service games and AAA titles. And, more fundamentally, because the media I tend to reference is the absolute pinnacle of human achievement.
So I said 1/7 of the video before. Maybe I need to correct that to 1/6 or 1/5. The disclaimer just keeps going.
Kinda weird to have to say this, but when I reference these things, I am not saying that Genshin is a failure unless it lives up to these examples. I try to find a piece of media which exemplifies the aspect of storytelling that I'm focusing on to make it clear what I'm talking about and to showcase just how fantastic it can be when it's really dialed up to 11. Note that I also reference indie games made by tiny teams. For example, Jasan on as the pinnacle of how fun a more restrictive and gamified approach to cliff climbing traversal can be. If you don't use anything as a benchmark for comparison, then there's no common ground for discussion. While there are different ways to solve that, the simplest is to show how far the scale can go. And it should go without saying that we're not expecting that every single thing should reach that level. Once you have a shared understanding of what you're talking about, then you can acknowledge that yes, this aspect of the game could be more effective if it took a step or two in that direction.
Honestly, if I was making this vid, I would just take the dislikes, right? Like this is insane work. I would just take the dislikes. This is insane work. We haven't even gotten into any of the actual points yet. This is what we have to do when we interact with the Hoyo community. We have to create a standalone video, a standalone fucking disclaimer, a whole goddamn thesis about what we're going to make and why you shouldn't flame me just yet. Anytime you make a video, you actually have to make a second one, but it's at the start. It's 5 minutes and 46 seconds, and I'm not even blaming her. I'm not even blaming her at this point. I am blaming the fucking community. Anytime you're a Hoyoverse creator, you're a Genshin Impact creator, before you make a critique about the game, I assume you have to make a disclaimer this fucking long so that you don't get ripped apart by the community. This is absurd. This is ridiculous. We're just getting into like our track record of how we've been like fair in our critiques, why the critiques are fair. And so it's like just laying the fucking runway like it's a goddamn paved road before we've even gotten into any of the points that she's trying to make. Oh man, it's gotta be a stressful life. I'm not gonna lie, it's gotta be a stressful life being a Genshin creator. You got all this fucking shit that's just bad about the game, but you can't talk about it. Otherwise, your community is gonna be like the fucking rabbits from ReZero. They're gonna start eating your ass up. They're gonna start eating your fucking ass up like a bunch of animals. Unless you do shit like this. This is exhausting.
But honestly, while the idea that we should hold gachas to the same standards as AAA games was not even on my radar when making those comparisons, should we really accept a lower quality bar just because it's a gacha game? In the end, we're all choosing whether to spend our limited time on this world playing this game, and whether we like it or not, it is directly competing with all these other things for our attention. There are a few facets to this, and each of them does deserve consideration. First, one argument which I've actually seen people put forward
in the video. I think she just made a point about how we all have a finite amount of time in the day. And so, you know, just because a game is free, just because a game is a gacha, doesn't mean that it like has like a free pass to be dog shit. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're paying with one of the most precious resources you have, right? Time. And time is precious in a way that you can never get it back. There are some people who would give away their life's fortune, everything they've ever accumulated across 90 plus years of life. They would give it all away to have more time. And that is what you're spending when you play a gacha game, specifically a free-to-play one like this.
First, one argument which I've actually seen people put forward is that gacha games cannot afford the same level of investment as AAA games. This overlooks just how profitable gachas can be in general, and completely ignores how much Hoyo invests into Genshin. While gachas historically did not bother to compete with AAA games, their revenue per dollar invested is reportedly much higher than any AAA game could ever dream of, outside of a few live service behemoths like GTA. Hoyo made the bet that an open-world gacha game with quality akin to AAA expectations would be worth the investment. They reportedly spent $100 million to develop it before launch, and invest a further $200 million every year for ongoing development. That's a similar annual budget to the entire budget for many of these AAA games we're talking about.
I would say that in terms of, this isn't, I think, the most fair assumption ever, because let's be honest here, right? The games that have like 200 million in budget, they take a lot longer to make. A $200 million budget game, you're not starting development and then releasing that game in a year. You need to have a way longer scope for the project if that's going to be the $200 million budget. Hoyoverse is supposedly spending $200 million a year on Genshin for its ongoing development. I would love to see how much of that is actually going into the game, and I would love to see how much of that is actually just going into things like the marketing and the events and, like, you know, their concerts and shit like that. Because I'm gonna be real, I think they're spending most of their money on marketing. There's a reason why it's 2025 and they're releasing their first new model for the characters. Verisa has the first new model that the game has ever had. The game released in 2020, September of 2020, with a couple of playable models, skeletons, right? Rigging. And it took until now, 2025, for them to release their newest type of character body type. There is no way they're spending even close to $200 million on the development of the game. I don't even know if it's fucking 50. Maybe it's like 25, to be honest. Who knows what it is? There's just not enough content actually being created, not enough creativity. The same kind of like recycled stuff, recycled animations. Why do all of the Claymore users have the same heavy attack? Why do all of the polearm users have the same heavy attack? You're literally making millions of dollars a month, hundreds of million dollars, tens of millions a month, hundreds annually, if not billions, and you can't create custom attack animations for every single character. It's stuff like that where you look at it and you just know that there's not that much actual care being put into the development. And so they're just putting stuff into marketing so that they can make more money and attract more players, not into the actual game. That's what's going on with Genshin. 1,000,000%. And the proof is in the pudding of how little the game has progressed in 5 years.
Similar annual budget to the entire budget for many of these AAA games we're talking about. Their bet paid off spectacularly well, with Genshin earning billions. For a while, people joked that they had found the infinite money glitch. Even if the revenue decline is as steep as various trackers claim, Genshin's income still justifies that level of investment, so its budget is huge even by the highest standards. Genshin may be an outlier here compared to other gachas, but to argue that they don't have enough money to make improvements is misguided at best. However, even if they can afford the level of investment, there is a valid argument that the monetization method of gacha games inevitably has an effect on how they tell their stories. Gachas live and die by releasing new characters at a regular cadence, and the best of them integrate each new character into the story in turn. This results in a very large cast of characters, and a story which by necessity rotates through them at a steady pace, as new characters take center stage while older ones slowly fade into the background. This does absolutely put strict guardrails in place which restrict the story that the game can tell. However, as many creative people will tell you, having a framework around which you develop your art can be a good thing for creativity. Much of this is a solved problem in the gacha space. Genshin does it by having the traveler move from region to region with a different cast of characters in each area and occasional throwbacks to older regions.
I think she's kind of hit the nail on the head here. There's a certain type of storytelling you want to use in gacha games, right? To ensure that whoever is on banner gets their time in the sunlight, gets their exposure in front of the player, and becomes more attractive of a character to pull. I think that is pretty much tried and true. And what it leads to, right, is potentially storytelling in parts. Storytelling that can feel like you maybe abruptly ended in one place and you're now somewhere else with an entirely new cast. However, that doesn't mean the story has to suck. That doesn't mean the storytelling has to suck. That doesn't mean that you have to end up in a situation where the characters are dictating the story. And I think that this excuse isn't really one that people should be using for why the story in a game is bad. You can use this sort of framing, just like the creator is saying over here. You can use this sort of framing to still create something that's great. And all you have to do is look at Wuthering Waves 2.0, or honestly, ZZZ 1.4 to understand that. Because I think both patches were done quite well when it comes to character-based storytelling.
That's a simple framework within which there's tons of scope to tell fantastic stories. They've already managed to do so multiple times. One argument, which I haven't seen mentioned much...
Oh, and Fontaine. That's what I missed, ladies and gentlemen. Fontaine was pretty good. And unfortunately, Genshin has only gone downhill from there. Like, really downhill.
One argument, which I haven't seen mentioned much, possibly because I've made it myself pretty explicitly in many videos, is that gacha character marketing is somewhat at odds with some fundamentals of good stories. A common perspective is that the essence of a story is something changed. People tend to care most about stories which focus on relatable characters, so a natural next step is this character changed. Much narrative theory explores how to show characters changing in ways which capture our imagination and make us care. However, gacha marketing is arguably at its best when it can describe a character in a way which is concise, cohesive, and unchanging. This character is a bubbly and enthusiastic tour guide. This one is a reserved and snarky fashionista. This one is a carefree wandering samurai with a troubled past. This desire for a definitive description of each character is at odds with the tendency to want characters to grow throughout a story. As I tried to emphasize in my recent Clorand video, even the most wooden and unchanging character can be made to feel alive by showcasing change in in other ways. In Cloran's case, regardless of whether you consider her an interesting character or not, it's undeniable that her relationship with Navia changes significantly over the course of the story.
I think that's where a lot of like people's emphasis on like characters interacting with each other, characters talking more, not just, you know, having a relationship with the main character. One of the bigger critiques for Wuwa, I think that this is something that Genshin does pretty decently well. They go ahead and instead of like fleshing out the characters more or having them like change their inclination or like change how they're viewing things, their worldview, like actual character development, they do inter-character development where the relationships between two playable characters instead becomes different. In Wuthering Waves, right, it's safe to say that in 1.0 and some of the earlier patches, the way that the characters changed in 1.0 was inherently linked to Rover. And a lot of people like that. They like that their main character, they like that the person that they're supposed to be, the self-insert, is going in and changing things in the game world. In Genshin Impact, it's safe to say that some people are upset by the fact that Aether or Lumine, whoever you decided to choose, they're the ones that are kind of sitting standby. They're in the chair in the corner in the hotel room while the other characters do something. They're just sitting there being like a passive observer. They might jump in once in a while. They're the cameraman. Some people like it that way. Other people like having a pivotal role and then actually affecting things. You prefer what you prefer. But a lot of people have critiques for Genshin. A lot of people have critiques for Wuwa. But they do the character development in different ways. And so, yeah, there's really no excuse on the story side over here for it either. And Wuwa's obviously, right, been playing around a little bit in 2.0, doing a mix of both. And I think they found a good blend. A good blend for sure.
And that this makes her at least a little more interesting than she would otherwise have been. Or, to show a different approach, Shen Yun feels dynamic not because she changes, but because our perspective of her changes. She seemed uppity and uncaring the first dozen times we meet her in her bird form, but in her story quest we discover that this was a facade, and just below the surface she's incredibly caring and kind to those around her. There are restrictions on what stories Genshin can tell, but those restrictions do not make it impossible for those stories to be compelling.
You'll notice that all of the examples that she listed of, you know, pretty actually decent storytelling in Genshin, there's not a single character from Natlan mentioned. Because without a doubt, one of the biggest critiques about Natlan and what people fucking despise about Natlan is the fact that the characters, aside from Mavuika, all feel like afterthoughts. They literally all feel like fucking afterthoughts. And then Mavuika gets the center stage, and then she's just like the Mary Sue, right? Oh, our Queen of War can do no wrong. She is the true pioneer of how to handle all of the problems in this space. And it's just so bad. It's so bad. I don't think anybody actually likes the story in Natlan, and they're probably forcing themselves to like it. That's a big part of why the game is in such a dog shit spot currently, is because the story in Natlan actually is just bad. It's just actually bad.
But those restrictions do not make it impossible for those stories to be compelling. And that's not even getting to the question of whether it actually makes any sense for them to impose this restriction on themselves in the first place. Another common point of contention is that gacha games have limited time in which to create their stories, so they're inherently more rushed and the quality bar should naturally be lower. On one hand, no matter what the situation is, the developer's work-life balance always matters more than any desire for consistent or quality updates on behalf of the audience. But on the other hand, this argument doesn't match up with anything we know about Genshin's development cycle. Let's take Natlan, for example. Many people making this argument seem to be under the impression that Hoyo would have been cramming most of the work for the story's finale into the 6 weeks leading up to its release.
These guys are so dumb. I think what people don't realize is that they're not like writing the fucking story in between each patch. They're not like, oh man, we gotta rig this cutscene now, guys. You'd be surprised at how much is actually already storyboarded and complete before the region even starts. And obviously, right, these devs are leaving themselves room on like what they can potentially change based off of audience feedback. But let's be real here. Majority of the work is already done. They're not like, this is one time where you could say that Hoyo actually planned it months in advance. Just because it's bad doesn't mean they were rushing. It means that they took pretty much the same amount of time that they usually would. They just sucked balls on this implementation. And it's perfectly fine for that to happen. Just because, like, you could have put in the exact same amount of work, We've all done it in our lives. We do something well. We try to do something adjacent to what we did that we did well. We put in the same amount of work. We put in the same amount of effort, right? We do the same amount of like procedures and stuff, and it just doesn't turn out that well. And we find out later, oh, it's because we were lacking this, we were lacking that, or we weren't thinking enough about this. But that's the thing. I don't think it's like Natlan. We went ahead and like they just fucking bum rushed everything. They just did a shit job. They probably, and we're never going to know for sure, right? They probably just did a really fucking bad job. And it happens. And calling that out and saying how bad it is will help those devs figure out what they did wrong and how to make sure it doesn't happen again.
While it's certainly possible that was the case, if it was, then something is hideously wrong. For example, we know for a fact that voice actors tend to record their lines months in advance of the patch actually being released. The English voice actor strike started towards the end of July, and some actors pre-recorded voice lines were still in the game all the way until 5.2, which was released in October. That means they had finalized dialogue ready to record something like 3 months in advance, and voice acting comes towards the end of the process. All of the idea generation, writing, refinement, feedback and approval cycles, translation, and so on were by necessity finished before that.
You brought the glue, right? Hey, if you know how time works, you understand her argument here. Probably does make sense for voice acting to be at the bottom of the list, right? Because you kind of have to write the whole fucking story first. Makes sense to me. Makes sense to me that you would write the whole story first and know where it's going before getting the voice actors on board.
Unless someone comes up with some conclusive proof that they really do cram all the development in the last minute, the content treadmill argument doesn't quite work. Oya started developing Genshin in January 2017. By the time the game released in 2020, they already have at least a rough outline for the entire story. Nalan didn't release until almost 4 years later. I'm speculating here, of course, but while they will have focused on the earlier regions for much of that time, it would have been bizarre if they did not start putting together Natlan's story before the game even came out, and continue developing it on and off throughout. Those early years must have included collaboration across all teams working on design, gameplay, narrative, and so on, all working towards a vision for the story. After release, once each nation is finished, they likely have an entire year to work on converting the next nation's story from an outline into a finished script, since the annual release cadence is the primary constraint. If that's even remotely true, then they don't have 6 weeks to create each patch's story. They actually have much longer. Of course, even if it is for any given story, it's possible that they had to throw out all their work at the last minute and put together something different.
I think that's what these devs are doing right now. They're in rapid fucking re-scramble mode. They're probably like, okay, Natlan actually is... And Hoyoverse is going to have all the metrics, right? That's why they're putting out all these new surveys, right? That's why they're talking about making all these changes to the game, right? That's why these devs are patting themselves on the fucking back, right? Because they probably feel bad about what's going wrong, right? They need like a little bit of a moral boost on their live streams. I bet you these devs are fucking scrambling right now, trying to figure out what the fuck they're going to do after Natlan bombed. That's why I assume we're going to fucking Croc Kai, Cobra Kai, wherever the fuck it is, right? Instead of Righteous Naya in the next version. Is it Nod Cry? What is it? I'm just gonna call it Cobra Kai. They're going to the Karate Kid for the next region. And that is because they need time to readjust. They need time to replan out whatever the fuck they're going to do, because they completely fucked it all up across version 5.0. And they did it after Dewey cried. They did it after Dewey May Cry 1. And they do not want the sequel to that film. They do not want the sequel to that video game releasing anytime soon. So they need to fix something, and they need to fix it fast. And that's why instead of a filler patch, Genshin players are getting a filler region. A filler year. Insane.
The point is that even if this did happen, it would not be due to a 6-week content release cycle and would be caused by fundamental problems with the story itself. I'm sure there are other similar arguments, but from what I can tell, they all boil down to excuses which don't really make much sense. Gacha games make good money selling characters, and there's no reason that they should not be held up to a reasonable quality standard. In a market where most gachas do not put in the effort, it just means there's a potential gap for a game which does raise the quality bar.
There's a potential gap for a game that does raise the quality bar. Oh boy! Wonder what that one is. Oh boy! Wonder which that one is. Maybe it's the game that added to theirs what still doesn't exist in others. Wonder what that one could be. Oh, B-roll, not related. B-roll irrelevant. Yeah, don't look at that B-roll. Sorry, guys. I just alt-tabbed for a second. Not related to the video.
The more they make the audience care about the characters, the more people will feel compelled to spend money on them. The better the story, the more people care. If anything, a game being a gacha should mean they have more incentive to make the story shine.
Story and storytelling. Take notes, Honkai Star Rail 3.0. Probably would have sold more in version 3.0 if there weren't as many fucking black screens with white text. You probably would have sold more because people would be like, wow, I'm seeing the new characters do cool things. Instead of just being told what the new characters are doing that's cool, I get to see them do cool stuff. It's just like basic common sense, right? That's why there were so many people that quit during 3.0.
Another contention raised by many was that they feel that you shouldn't critique a story which is still in progress. Again, I wholeheartedly disagree. I do agree that when a story is incomplete, the fact that there is more to come should change the way you view it. For example, in my video where I explored my first impressions of Fontaine, I mentioned that I disliked Furina's bratty persona, but I emphasized that my hope for her was for this to be a setup which allowed them to show her growing as a person, and that this could make her a brilliant character in the end. The fact that the future installments can change the story does not make that initial discussion any less worthwhile. Each part of an ongoing story can be critiqued in isolation, you just need to be mindful that there is more to come.
I think the best way to critique a story, and this is where I'm going to disagree with her a little bit, or I think you can critique a story in parts. I just think if you're critiquing a story for a region in the parts that it's being laid out, your critique is inherently going to be incomplete and just simply not be the full picture. And I think as a result of that, not a high quality critique. It's like a 4-chapter book, right? You read 1 chapter of it, 3 chapters are left and you're critiquing chapter 1. You can do that. It's just, you're probably going to have to go back and readjust your take. And it's like more work. There's more room for confusion. And I think it's a lower quality critique versus, right, seeing all 4 chapters and then critiquing the whole thing, critiquing chapter 1, knowing what's ahead in chapters 2, 3, and 4 is a much stronger, more well-rounded point of view on the entire experience. And so similarly, because of that, right? Obviously in a gacha game, you're only going to have piecemeal takes at a time because there's literally a 6-week gap between the versions. That's why I say the best way to critique it is to, again, you can talk about what you liked and stuff and what was good, but leave those disclaimers in there and make sure that you're going back and reviewing the arc as a whole. I think the strongest critique, right, or the strongest review of Fontaine's story is going to be after you get through, right, all the way to version, I think it was 4.3 or 4.4. That's typically how long it takes for Genshin's Archon quest to be done, like 3 patches into the version or maybe 4. It's a much stronger critique to look at all 4 of them and then make your final take then. And I see something in chat that's pretty funny. That's like saying you cannot say the appetizer was bad because it's not the whole meal. Well, think about it this way. I think using the appetizer or restaurant analogy is bad because it's not like you can eat something for lunch or you can eat something as the 2nd or 3rd course meal that makes the appetizer in your stomach suddenly taste better. But for a story, you can see something in 2.0 that you don't like, but then something in 2.1, 2.2, or 2.3 makes what you originally didn't like in 2.0 better. That is something that can be done in a gacha story. That's something that can't really be done for a meal. For example, Professor Snape in the first 5 or 6 Harry Potter movies, suddenly you think he's actually a better person despite the fact that he's just a raging dickhead the entire time because of what you find out in books 6 and 7. Or maybe just 7, but you can't do that for a meal. So that's why I don't think the appetizer, food, restaurant analogy really works out that well. That's my take on it.
And look for ways that the future chapters could recontextualize the aspects you're critiquing. And seriously, looking in depth at a story which is currently in progress is often more interesting than analyzing something finished. And when it comes to episodic stories like Genshin, arguing that people should hold off on their critique until after the entire arc is done is a really odd take. That's like saying that people should not have talked about Arcane Season 1 until after Season 2 was done. Yet, some of the most interesting analysis of that show breaks things down episode by episode, let alone season by season. It's important to acknowledge that future chapters could change things entirely. That does not mean that the discussion should just wait until it's done. Many people also argued that there are hard limitations on what Hoyo are able to achieve with Genshin for reasons which are unrelated to the gacha model. One of the biggest is that they're limited by running an older engine, which isn't really built for the type of game Genshin ended up becoming.
Yeah, guys, it's because Genshin's running Unity. That's why we can't get artifact loadouts. We can't get artifact loadouts because it's Unity. We can't get new character models because it's Unity. We can't get any of these features because it's all running on Unity. It's Unity's fault. Arknight's Enfield is running on Unity. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot you could say about Enfield, where yeah, a lot is better than what's in Genshin. Specifically with, you know, the stuff that we originally viewed as limitations.
One of the biggest is that they're limited by running an older engine, which isn't really built for the type of game Genshin ended up becoming. There's a lot of merit to this argument. Most of the really well-known games built in Unity are very different from Genshin.
True.
Ones like Hollow Knight, Ori, Subnautica, or City Skylines, for example. Many of these games are fantastic, but the choice to build Genshin in Unity does absolutely hold them back in some ways. However, for a lot of the points where people bring this up as a justification, it really doesn't apply. For example, some argued that the game engine is what prevents them from making their in-game cutscenes feel cinematic, which completely ignores the fact that cinematography is all about camera work.
Guys, Honkai Star Rail has black screens with white text because of Unity. The only reason why all the characters do is... The only reason why all they do is that is because of Unity. Unity makes it so you can only have 3 idle animations per character. You cannot add more. You're not allowed to. March 7th and Black Swan's forehead touching? Unity doesn't let that happen. You're not allowed to touch models together. It breaks the engine. Guys, just get it together. Jeez. It's not the devs' fault. They're working as hard as they can. They're totally not being lazy, paycheck-stealing bums.
All about camera work, composition, and timing, which Unity is no less capable of than any other engine. Similarly, there's nothing stopping Hoyo from adding more expressions and dynamics to the characters. They have even done so in this year's Lantern Ride, showing characters hugging in-engine.
Damn. As far as I'm concerned, didn't Genshin Impact release 3 years before Honkai Star Rail? Didn't Genshin release 3 years before Honkai Star Rail? Isn't Honkai Star Rail the newer game? Honestly, this turned from a Genshin critique video into a shitting on HSR video. Cause I'm not gonna lie, reviewing 3.0 now, it's actually kind of embarrassing. Isn't 3.0, after seeing some of this stuff, just actually embarrassing? Like, the older game could model this, but HSR 3.0 wasn't able to touch 2 foreheads together? You're kidding me. You're just kidding me at this point. HSR is better than sleeping pills. Stop hating on the game. You know what? I didn't even think about it that way. Addiction to sleeping pills, it's a growing plague in modern society, and I'm glad that Hoyoverse is doing their part to wean people off of that addiction. You just play Honkai Star Rail 3.0 instead. You'll be tucked in bed in no fucking time. Speedrunning a good night's rest with that one.
When people critique things like Genshin cinematography, we're not saying we expect it to reach the levels of the world's greatest filmmakers.
Just at least be on par with Wuthering Waves, right?
We're just saying that the game would benefit from making more effort in that area. And we always point to places where they have been putting that effort in and praising them for it. The game engine does impose restrictions on what Hoyo can achieve with Genshin. That doesn't mean that they should not make an effort to push it to its limits. Another key limitation is that a large part of Genshin's audience plays on mobile phones. Much like the game engine point, this does introduce a ton of restrictions. The game needs to work at lower graphical fidelity levels, on different screen dimensions, and with different control formats. While they could avoid these limits by dropping mobile as a platform, mobile users are a huge and vitally important part of the audience, so that is not a solution that they should ever consider. However, in my recent videos, this point was most often made as a response to my wish for the Archon quest to have more visible, lasting consequences in the overworld after the story is over. I find that quite odd. For one thing, they do exactly what I'm asking for in the game already. It's just tied to world quests instead of the Archon quests. Many world quests change the state of the world either permanently or temporarily, and as far as I'm aware, they work fine on mobile too. What's stopping them from doing the same as part of an Archon quest?
This doesn't even really seem related to mobile to me, but I guess this is the only excuse I could potentially think of, and this is me putting on my Hoyo shill hat. World quests are optional, while Archon quests theoretically are like not, because they're in the main quest. And so maybe it's for like the people that are like, oh, I want my rain to stay here, or I want the tree to look exactly like it did when I came here. And so I'm not going to do the world quest because otherwise that tree is going to look different, and I don't like that. While in the Archon quest, right? Oh my gosh, they changed the tree even though I like the older one. And they made me do this quest because it's a main quest. Oh, I don't like this one bit. That's what I would assume is potentially the reason, but I could be wrong there. But that's just my take.
A valid argument against that is that the consequences I was asking for would be more wide-reaching, and if they did that regularly, it could take up more storage space. But even if adding a few more states to the world does have an outsized effect on storage use, we absolutely have the money to invest in systems which allow for dynamic loading and deleting of data to minimize its impact. From my perspective, it's more a question of whether the more impactful storytelling this would enable would be worth the investment it would take to make it happen. And since only Hoyo can have any idea of how much it would cost, we can't really say whether it's even possible. If it would be far more difficult than it might seem, then fair enough. But that doesn't mean that we should just not even mention the possibility. Talking about ways the story could have been more impactful is never a bad thing.
Maybe just add options for like the world changing and stuff to be like more optional, or like, I don't know, limit the scope of it. Have people like decide. How about this? How about actually add permanence to the decisions that you can make as a character in the game world? Maybe you can decide what color you want the tree to be. You can be like, oh, I like it the way it is. Keep it that way. Or make it purple. Make it pink. Or hell, make it blue, right? And let the player choose which one they want to do. And so they can keep it the same, or they can turn it into whatever design they're looking for, right? And then just let them change it at any point. Change it at any time. I don't know, something like that. Does that make them money? No, so they probably won't add it. You're right.
Another interesting point, which we can never really know for sure, is that since Genshin is highly popular cultural export made by a Chinese company, there's a good chance that their hands are tied, so to speak, when it comes to certain aspects of storytelling and character design.
They released CZZ. They can do whatever the fuck they want. That game is literally just it's button mashing porn. It's button mashing softcore porn. That's what ZZZ is. These devs can do whatever they want at this point. Have you seen what Verisa looks like? Verisa literally looks like somebody's barely disguised fetish. She is somebody's barely disguised fetish. Let's be honest here. Bro was drawing that shit. Bro was rigging that model one-handed. The whole team of people that worked on that character.
When it comes to certain aspects of storytelling and character design, for example, it's possible that this influences Hoyo's direction, but in many cases, this point seems a little overblown. For example, the censorship laws around blood and violence are often cited as a reason they may avoid properly exploring the consequences of war. But if you look up more of the details, these laws are more around things like graphic depictions of blood itself, rather than a restriction on exploring the topic in its entirety. It's certainly possible to explore these themes without falling foul of that kind of censorship. I could definitely see there being a more subtle influence, but either way, this particular point is always going to be based on speculation and inference, and each person will make different assumptions on how this influences the storytelling. Personally, I don't think it's all that strong, but I 100% recognize that that's entirely based on vibes. I'd be fascinated to know for sure. One final important limitation is that the story is originally written in Chinese and is translated into other languages.
Stop using AI then. Little did you know, guys, that ZZZ actually had a problem with this, where the localization of their side event stories, right? You know, the ones that are just entirely dialogue, they're machine translated because nobody's actually saying them, and they're dog shit. They are literally machine translated, and it is not good. It is not good. And so the devs, right, maybe need to stop laying off their global workforce in lieu of using machines to translate for them, because the machines are not really doing a good job. And they should have probably tested how good the machines are at their job before firing all those people. But hey, whatever, right? Hey, it'll be fine, right? They'll just do another double banner.
And of course, translation is difficult. And while it's hard enough just for surface level conversations, when it comes to things like subtext, the difficulty is even more acute. This is a valid point, but it is a problem that Hoyo could throw money at to solve.
Or Ultron, you just You could just do that too.
For example, they could expand their script so that in addition to the words the characters say, it explicitly explains the intended subtext and give the translators the time and space to adjust the character statements more in order to convey any missing subtext so that it's tailored to different audiences. Subtext is arguably a universal language, and there's a whole host of fantastic TV shows and films which have successfully been translated without losing all that extra meaning. That may increase the difficulty of translating the content, but if that is the reason that Hoyo failed when it comes to subtext in the translated versions, there's nothing stopping them from investing more to fix that.
Yeah, there is. Dwayne's not going to be able to afford his 69th yacht. Hoyo's gonna maybe have to stop funding their nuclear reactor. What do you mean? They can't just spend more money. They're only making like $1 billion a year. Gosh. Come up with a reasonable suggestion, you big dummy. They're only making like a couple $2 billion. What do you mean? Invest more into the product that's making them the most money. Who the hell would do that? The fuck? It's not like they're the most successful gacha gaming company ever. What a ridiculous ask from this consumer.
There are also many who argued that regardless of any limitations, they feel there are important justifications that explain why things are the way they are. One, which is super weird to me, is the argument that it is the way it is because of the law. This came up in response to one of my examples for how Natlan's story could have been made to feel like it has more lasting consequences. After the war with the Abyss in Act 4, it felt odd to me that the overworld instantly reverted to the green and gorgeous landscapes we had seen just beforehand.
Why does it Mavuika look like this? Why does she look like this? She actually looks like she's from Natlan. Why is she wearing a fucking... Why is she basically wearing the equivalent of a BDSM outfit? Why is she actually wearing the equivalent of an actual, like, leather BDSM outfit on the battlefield? Oh, skin... Okay. Oh, I forgot. I forgot. We haven't even gotten into her motorcycle. Yeah, you're right. These devs were just doing whatever the fuck they wanted. You're right.
To the green and gorgeous landscapes we had seen just beforehand, and would have felt the story had more impact if the world had instead been left with some stray areas of corruption which could go around cleaning up if we wanted to. Some people's arguments against this was that the story says the Abyss is in retreat, or that the law says it should work like this.
Okay, whoever said that is stupid because we literally do that in Sumeru. The Abyss literally has like fucking cancerous tumors all across the forest, and part of the exploration in that game is just going around and then cleaning them all up. Maybe that's the biggest problem. All the people going against the actual critiques in Genshin don't actually play the game, or their short-term memory is so bad, or they just can't remember things, and they don't actually know what has happened in the past and what possibly could happen in the game. You have to realize that there's a lot of dumb people out there, and most of the time, if you know you're making a valid critique, because let's face it, if you think you're a smart person and you feel, and you can tell, right, that most of the stuff you do is like well received, when you make something, it probably should be well received, or you should think that it is if you know you did a good job. And if somebody responds badly to what you think you did a good job on, and you have a reputation and a history of good takes, well, it turns out maybe the person critiquing your take or saying that your critique isn't right is actually the person that's wrong. And let's face it, when you consider how dumb a lot of Genshin players are, that's probably the case. That's probably what's going on.
For one thing, this feels a bit irrelevant. If the problem is that the Abyss was completely beaten back, then there are easy ways to tweak that suggestion which would avoid it. For example, what if hilly churls and other normal monsters spread out and took over the land abandoned by the humans during the war and while they were recovering? There are easy enough ways to convey the same level of actual aftermath without even changing any of the plot points. But regardless, Hoyo writes the story. If they had wanted to add that specific point, they could have just tweaked a few lines of dialogue so that instead of all of the Abyss was beaten back, it said the main army of the Abyss was beaten back, leaving the possibility of some stragglers being left behind. When we're talking about potential ways to improve the story, we're explicitly looking for changes they would have to make. Saying they can't do that because they would have to change the story for it to work is missing the point. Another argument many made in response to that point about consequences is that the game does have some stories which result in the exact kind of thing I was asking for. This is true to some extent. Some quests do cause consequences in the world, for example, some NPCs disappearing from the overworld after the war in Natlan. However, while those kinds of consequences are welcome additions, they lack the breadth and depth which I was pointing towards when making that point.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with Hoyoverse games. Everything after Honkai Impact 3, it doesn't fucking matter what's going on in the story. It doesn't matter what's going on. What happened in Penacony? What happened in the Zhanzhou Lofu? But the Saurians that died? What happened in Inazuma? Oh, okay. They killed, what's her name? Siegfried. Oh, no, sorry. What is the Crimson Witch's name? Senorita. Senora. Yeah. They fragged her. They fragged Tepe. Characters that you really didn't give a shit about. Characters that you're not gonna remember. Oh, I guess they fragged Capitano too, but you know for sure Brother Man is coming back because they put him in eternal slumber. Because apparently that dumbass has been awake for 500 years. You know that nothing for real is actually happening in these stories. Nobody's ever gonna die. If it does die, it's like some nameless NPC that you met like an hour ago. And it's just like, bro, we can just move on. Fontaine, somebody actually died, right? In Fontaine, the Archon actually died. And then like Farina's like some weird version of her, right? Like the human version of her. And they actually killed Farina. There's a reason why Fontaine is considered the peak of Genshin, because the story actually had like some emotional weight to it and actually had like some feeling of loss to it as well. In Sumeru as well. Who died in Sumeru? Oh, the old Scaramouche. The old Scaramouche died. Oh, everybody's perception of Scaramouche. Scaramouche and the Irminsul. He's still fucking alive. He's still alive with his stupid ass hat, flying around wherever the fuck he wants. In Sumeru, Kusanali was literally erased from the... Okay, guess what? They had the same fucking model. At least with Focalors, they gave her a different outfit. Okay, so you could actually tell them apart. Kusanali was just like the fucking, ooh, I'm like the glittery version. You know what most people forgot? They probably forgot about Kusanali as a whole too. Because she was that... not differentiated from Nahida in the story. She was so similar to Nahida in the quest, people just forgot she was different in the first place.
Widespread war is devastating. The consequences we did get are so minor that only a few people even noticed them. I simply feel that the story would have been more impactful if they had taken it further. People also often made the point that much of the thematic depth and nuance that I'm looking for exists in the game. It's just that it's in the world quests rather than the Archon quests. That was kind of my whole point. That the game does have fantastic depth, but it often fails to bring that depth to the Archon quests. World quests are optional and are a great place for Hoya to dive deeper into the lore and expand on everything we love about Teyvat.
No, they're not. Because Hoya vs. current design of the world quests actually promotes you not playing them. Because they're too fucking long. They take too long to tell the fucking story. The world quests are not good enough to play them. The world quests are literally not good enough to warrant the time it takes to play them. And the rewards, honestly, aren't high enough for most people to play them either. Once you add the skip button, then the world quests are now playable. Because there's too much extraneous bullshit you have to get through to actually get... Because some world quests actually have decent parts. But there's too much extraneous bullshit that's made literally just to waste your time, where you're spending more time spamming spacebar or the left mouse button than actually paying attention to the story. And so it's not good. It's no good to put any kind of like a decent story or attempts at like a good storyboarding in the world quests when you make them that fucking long and that unenjoyable.
But these are optional side quests. Their existence does not excuse the Archon quest from telling a cohesive and compelling story. The Archon quests should stand on their own even without the added context of the world quests. If world building is an iceberg, then the Archon quest should be the view we get from the surface. We should see the visible story and some hints of what lurks beneath the surface, and the connection between the two should be visible. The story quest can then expose a deeper layer of the iceberg which was hidden underwater, and the scattered lore in books throughout the world and the descriptions of items and artifacts can explore the layers even deeper than that. If the Archon quest did a better job at this, it would make people more excited to dive deeper, since even people who currently don't really get into the world quest would feel more hooks dragging them further into the world.
This is where I'm gonna disagree. How about you have people play the content that they want, and you stop trying to put good story into a world quest when you make the delivery of the world quest absolutely disgustingly painful. Let's keep the good story and the good vibes and all of like the intricate storytelling into the stuff that is voiced, that has actually had a proofreader going through the dialogue, and stuff that's just naturally higher effort with more cutscenes and more cinematics, and just make world quests filled with action, right? Filled with dynamic storytelling, filled with like, in-game rendered cutscenes. Just do that instead. One example of one of the best world quests I've ever seen, right, is one that's just short and sweet from Wuthering Waves. The one, right, where you follow that Luma scale construct that just goes around and is fucking destroying the map. You see it literally like go through a bridge and blow the bridge up. That one has no you could skip all of the dialogue in that quest and you still will like it. You fight a fucking dragon at the end too. You could skip all of the dialogue but still understand what is going on. That is an amazing world quest. And I guarantee you, right? Because Kuro didn't have to spend that much time like writing and storyboarding it out and like, oh yeah, this NPC is gonna take you over there. Oh, and then you're gonna have to talk to that one and then go over there. Oh, and then go back. Oh, loop around. Okay. You just go from spot to spot. You don't talk to any fucking thing. You just kill some stuff, and then you go chase after the construct. You watch it blow up the fucking map. You kill it, and then you kill the dragon. Awesome. Amazing. I know more about the region. Hey, I saw it transform. I'm having a good time now. And now the storm is gone, and I can go freely explore. It's just stuff like that. Make it more of a game, less of a novel in the world quests.
One justification for the lower quality of the story is that the target audience of the game is young. For one thing, I'm unconvinced that the target audience actually is that young, considering that in order to spend on a gacha game, you need money. And generally speaking, the people with disposable income are adults.
Or they're Mr. Pokey's children. They also have red marks from the Switch. They have red marks across their body from the coat hanger, using his credit card without permission. Those naughty kids.
Not even my main disagreement with that perspective. Kids are more intelligent than people give them credit. I was a child once, and even then I hated it when media talked down to me. I happily watched films intended for older audiences as well as family films, or read books written for adults. Even if the audience skews young, that's no excuse to dumb the story down. Another potential justification is that the lower writing quality and prevalence of slop content comes from Hoya trying to increase playtime. In other words, while they could afford better writing, they deliberately avoid it because it would make their stories shorter and decrease playtime. If this were true, then it would be very disrespectful to the players and in my opinion would be a misguided direction.
If true. I got some crazy news for you, Sorosness. It is true. Why do you think there's no skip button? Why do you think Paimon just repeats the exact same thing you just heard the NPC explain, and then she says it in another unskippable dialogue that you have to wait a couple of seconds for? That's why. Because they're trying to increase... It is. That's why there's no skip button in the game. And I've said it before. And I am glad that this perception is now the majority take. Putting a skip button in the game ensures that you need a higher quality story so that players actually want to experience it. If you put a skip button in the game, your writers, your storyboarders, your directors now have to put in more effort and deliver a good story that is worth watching. Not putting a skip button in the game means that you don't need to put in any effort into your story because you can just go ahead and force everybody to watch it regardless. And the biggest example of that, ladies and gentlemen, is Honkai Star Rail 3.0, where there's no skip button. You have to sit through everything, and it is the most dog shit storytelling experience, the most dog shit story experience the gacha space has ever had. And that's what not having a skip button does, ladies and gentlemen.
Given a choice between lots of low quality story to wade through or less content at a much higher quality level, I'd expect the vast majority of people would choose quality over quantity. If anything, I'd want them to add a skip button to the game and track how often people use it and use that as their primary metric for gauging how successful their story is.
I'm gonna be honest. I thought at one point Sorosness was bagging on Wuwa for having a skip button, but I guess they might have changed their tune. Hey, this is the thing. I'm not gonna hold somebody accountable for them taking their incorrect take and then amending it to the correct one. Them saying that the skip button is bad was, in my opinion, an objectively wrong thing to say. I think that not having a skip button and saying that that's a better way to do it, I think that's just wrong. I think it's wrong in every single way. I don't think there's a redeeming factor to it. And so I am glad that she has now pivoted over to the side of even asking for skip button in Hoyo games. I'm cool with that. I think that's cool. I think that's awesome. I think that's great.
The closer they get to zero, people ever deciding to skip, the better. And finally, there were some common responses which essentially dismissed the entire discussion out of hand. First, the "these are just your opinions, bro" response. All critique is opinion. That's kind of the point. Many people find it interesting to talk about things they enjoy and hear other people's takes and compare them to their own. It enhances the entire experience for them and makes them enjoy it more. Anyone who doesn't feel that way can just not click on the video. Some subset of this argues that certain discussions are too nitpicky and focus too much on smaller details. I kinda have the same response there. Many people find joy in looking closer. People who find it annoying don't have to take part in those discussions. People really should stop getting offended when others share their perspective. In today's internet culture, it seems that for many people, nuance is utterly dead. Many seem to think that the moment someone says anything, even slightly negative about something, that means they are a hater who hates the thing and despises anyone who likes it and wants to burn it to the ground.
You're entitled to your opinion, but depending on how your opinion is formulated and how your opinion is explained, people are also entirely entitled, right, to picking apart your opinion based off of what led you to it. For example, if I'm going ahead, right, and I'm saying my opinion is that echo loadouts are bad, and the reason for that is it actually is way too much micromanagement. It's a really confusing interface, and I think that it just adds extra work for the player, and they're able to keep a greater track of what echoes they actually have when they're going through and manually sorting everything. You're making it too automatic for them, and they're going to lose connection to the game. I'm entitled to have that opinion, and people are entitled to tell me I'm fucking stupid for having that one. And I'm fucking stupid for listing those reasons as why I have that opinion, because it's a dumbass one. It's a stupid ass one that literally doesn't do anything, that's rooted in a misunderstanding of how people enjoy games. It's a complete L take, and people are allowed to tell me that. And if the only defense, right, that you have for your dog shit take is that, well, it's my opinion, bro, that is literally the worst one you could have. When people are meticulously picking apart that take with facts, with reality, with legitimate actual rebuttals, and all you say is, bro, stop it, it's just my opinion, bro, please stop it, bro, you've already lost.
Meanwhile, back in the world of sane people, it's healthy to be able to look at something you love and see that it's not perfect. Nothing is. Acknowledging and even analyzing its flaws does not mean you hate it. Genshin is one of my favorite games of all time.
I actually like Genshin Impact, funnily enough. But guess what? If you saw your best friend slowly turning into an alcoholic, their skin starts becoming like jaundiced and yellow, are you a bad friend if you tell them, hey, brother man, maybe you should stop drinking. Maybe you should stop doing that so much. Maybe you should stop doing XYZ things that are literally ruining your life. You'd probably be a bad friend if you didn't at least try to have them stop doing the thing that's ruining their life. Similarly, if you actually do like a game, the best thing that you can do for it is critique it, is to talk about the things that could be better, right? That people or designers or devs are doing wrong. And if you're not doing that, right, that means you don't want the game to get better and you don't want the game to improve. And guess what? You'll find that a lot of Wuthering Waves CCs, they'll be critiquing the game all the time. We might have a difference in critiques, like how I'll focus on stuff like, God damn, Phoebe sucks dick in Whimpering Waste. She's fucking awful in the game mode. Kuro should probably release something that makes Phoebe feel better in Whimpering Waste. While Ryuku Sensei is over there saying, oh my goodness, echo rolling is insane. I plus 25 every piece and I'm having the worst time of my life. And then Tectone's over here saying, you only need 250% ER, buddy boys. Hey, anybody else who wants you to have 280, you are an elitist. 250 or bust. Everybody has something that they care about. Tectone's talking about like elitists in the space. Oh, 280 ER, just reroll your account. Riku's talking about, oh, I want my endgame grind to be over in one day. Hyperbole, by the way. And then I'm talking about, I just want the new characters not to feel like shit in the game modes. There's always something to fix. There's always something to make better. People are just going to have different opinions about certain things, right? But everybody at least knows where people are coming from functionally on every side of every argument. We all have a reason for what we're saying, and it's all rooted in reality. And you can't say that we're necessarily wrong, but you can disagree with our implementations, our alternatives, and our solutions to how to fix this problem that we're talking about.
Genshin has flaws that I notice while playing it, and which I enjoy talking about with other people. It's weird that some people can't comprehend that both can be true at the same time. One oddly common argument is that since the game is free, we have no right to say anything negative. This entirely ignores that while it is free to play, it earns more than other comparable games would. The idea that Hoyo giving this game away for free results in them not having any resources to further—
You're spending your time, and time is the most valuable resource you could ever spend. Guess what, buddy boy? The 5 hours a day you spend playing Genshin Impact could be spent literally making hundreds of dollars instead. It's a fact. But you're not doing it, you're instead playing a game, so you're paying with your time.
Further improve it just completely ignores the basic facts. And even if they did earn nothing, as consumers who spend our time engaging with what they have created, we would still be well within our rights to share our perspective on their creation. A more understandable response was that the devs don't listen, or more specifically, that they don't care what
I mean, this is true though.
Westerners think. I'd be surprised if they don't pay any attention to the international community at all,
But they don't.
but there are valid reasons for them to care more about the audience closer to home for them.
Yeah, because they send death threats to Dewey if you do something that makes him unhappy. They literally try to send assassins after him, so he's probably just actually trying to not die.
As I mentioned right at the start, my perspective is no more important than anyone else's.
No, the potential assassin getting sent to Hoyo's headquarters, I'm pretty sure, like, their take is probably the most important. You don't want to do anything that, like, you know, gets them angry enough.
I'd be surprised if anyone at Hoyo has even seen one of my videos, let alone paid attention to them. That's simply not the point of them at all. I simply feel that these discussions are worth having, just for the sake of talking about interesting perspectives on things we collectively care about because it's fun. Another is that applying Western storytelling norms to a game from a completely different culture makes no sense. This assumes that people critiquing the game are expecting it to conform to Western norms. The type of person who plays Genshin is unlikely to be so insular as to think that Western storytelling tropes are the only lens through which to see the world. For me, personally, many stories from Eastern culture speak to me on a profound level, and I'd love to see Western media learn how to branch out from the usual structures and embrace things like Kisho Tenketsu, for example. While anyone's perspective on story will always be influenced by what they've experienced.
I find it ironic that we're using the whole Chinese shit that Yunjin is doing, but that we don't talk about how Natlan just, like, you know what Natlan did. I know what Natlan did. Like, we all know what Natlan did. I know Marco the Meatball knows what Natlan did. Yeah, I would probably... Well, maybe she doesn't want to attract that side. Maybe she just doesn't want to attract that side of, you know, she just doesn't want to be called a racist. You know what I mean?
For it's odd to assume that in today's world, any given person is limited to one specific viewpoint. And finally, those who dismiss any critique by saying, "You go write a story then if you're so smart."
Man, wait until these guys eat a piece of bread and they don't like it.
Mama, this piece of bread doesn't taste very good.
Shut up, John! You can't critique bread unless you know how to bake it yourself. You dumb 5-year-old dumbass.
I don't think these guys have ever thought that far.
Those who dismiss any critique by saying, "You go write a story then if you're so smart." For one thing, critiquing doesn't require you to be smart. For another, many people enjoy analyzing stories far more than they'd ever enjoy writing them. The two are adjacent but different sets of skills. There are many fantastic YouTube channels dedicated to dissecting their favorite media, and the points they make are often fascinating. Whether they spend their time creating their own stories or not is irrelevant. And honestly, I'd love to write stories. It's one of the reasons I like to engage in discussions which analyze the successes and flaws of other people's writing. But even people who don't share that dream can certainly enjoy these discussions just as much. So, are we expecting too much? I would argue
Absolutely not.
absolutely not.
Not pre-watched, by the way.
Hoping for the game to live up to its potential and expecting the developers to do their best, and that's not asking too much at all. Players invest a ton of time and money into the game and have every right to expect a return in the form of quality content and engaging storytelling. Critique isn't about tearing down the game, it's about wishing for it to be the best version of itself.
So keep shitting on Genshin Impact at every fucking opportunity you can, because there's so much shit wrong with the game that you could talk for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours upon hours about it. Because so much shit is broken, it stays broken, it never gets fixed. Instead of fixing it, they just add more useless quality of life that nobody fucking asked for, and they actively make the game worse. They add quality of life that's so bad, that has such poor feedback that the quality of life buff needs a quality of life buff. That's what these fucking devs do. You need to keep shitting on it if you want the game to get better.
Genshin is brilliant at some things and not so great at others. Pointing this out does not constitute hating on the game. If anything, it's an expression of love. It comes from wanting to see something you enjoy reach its full potential. While any one voice will always be too small to make a difference, the sentiment of the audience as a whole is important. If fans excuse poor storytelling or gameplay issues, the developers have less incentive to innovate or improve. If we talk about these problems and ask for things to get better, then of course they still might not listen.
Hey, so think about it this way. I would use that most recent survey where they asked about the weekly boss materials and the week gated, like the days in the week gated level up materials. If those don't get removed or changed within the next like 1 or 2 updates, the devs actually don't fucking care. The devs are actually just doing these surveys and stuff as a pure performative measure just to like make fun of you. They probably like read all the responses to that survey, they put them in like some sort of spreadsheet, and then they print them out and then fucking laugh at them in the staff room. Look at all of these dumbasses still playing our fucking game. Look at all these idiots who think we care. That's probably what they do with the data, if it isn't changed within the next 2 patches. So I would hold on until then. Overall, I would say pretty decent breakdown of the whole critique situation. I think she went through like every single goddamn excuse there is in gacha gaming. And the thing is, my oh my, was that a long disclaimer, right? That was a long ass disclaimer. And when you consider who her audience is, right? A bunch of the hoi hyo shills, people that would rather, if they had a choice between saving their Genshin Impact account or their family dog, you know which one they would choose. Their clean body pillow or good old mutt. You know who they would choose. They would choose the body pillow. They'd say fuck the dog. And the thing is, guys, a lot of these people are unhinged. A lot of people on YouTube, especially. And sometimes, as a CC, you gotta do what it takes to protect yourself. So I'm not gonna hold any of that disclaimer against her. She's playing with a bunch of dirty little pigs up in this sty. I thought this was actually a great one. I'm glad to see that she's changed some of her takes, especially in regards to things like Wuwa's skip button, because she's even asking for it in the Hoyo games while critiquing it right in the prior vid that she made about 2.0. Let me know what you all think. Peace out.